Today's Focus Report takes a closer look at one of the Middle East's simmering diplomatic crises. The small but oil-rich state of Qatar normally basks in the heat, but earlier this month, several of its powerful Gulf neighbours decided to leave it out in the cold. Led by Saudi Arabia, those Sunni countries cut their ties and imposed economic sanctions, accusing Qatar of supporting terrorist groups. But are those accusations justified? Our reporters Philomène, Remy and Jasmin Lavoie in Doha have been finding out.
A no man's land. Qatar's normally bustling border, its only land link with a foreign country, is empty today. On the other side, the country behind the current diplomatic standoff, Saudi Arabia. Usually, thousands of people pass through here with hundreds of trucks full of food supplies for Qataris. But Riyadh and its allies have decided to isolate Qatar. The victims of this isolation are numerous. One of them is Dilip, who runs this petrol station a few kilometres from the border.
Do you understand this crisis?
I don't have any idea about this.
And it's even harder to understand in the heat, 47 degrees Celsius outside. The Saudi-led boycott severed ties with Qatar amid a slew of punitive measures. The Gulf countries accuse Qatar of supporting terrorism. It's no secret that somewhere between these skyscrapers, some criminals have been able to find refuge. The Taliban even had an office here a couple of years ago.
The US has seen it as an irritant, as something that was problematic, but that vanished into insignificance compared to the major strategic help they were getting from Qatar in counterterrorism and in military operations. So there are a number of problematic individuals on there, a small number of individuals that are in Qatar. And it's long been recognized, including by the Qatari authorities.
The United States set up its largest military base in the region here. Qatar's unwillingness to submit to its neighbours' demands has annoyed other regional powers.
Short-term problems are the Muslim Brotherhood and Iran, both of which are seen by Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi as countering their their security interests. And the longer-term problem is the fact that Qatar is taking an independent line in the overall view of how Arab politics should be run.
The country's been enhancing its international reputation in recent years. It won the right to host the World Cup in 2022, and the Doha-based channel Al Jazeera was voted lead news satellite in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia has closed Al Jazeera's local office and is likely to ask Qatar to close down the media service completely.
We have heard that there have been demands and lots of allegations of what's behind all this. One of the claims is that one of the demands is to close Al Jazeera. We are absolutely committed. We're going to carry on with our editorial mission.
Your first segment, Andrew, is on censorship, right?
Censorship and the threat to use cybercrimes law to silence.
With more than 3,000 employees across the world, critics accuse the channel of supporting the Muslim Brotherhood.
On peut tout dire sur Al Jazeera. On peut tout dire.
Yes, we can say anything. As far as we're concerned, we can say everything. On the first day of the crisis, our news directors had one message: we are and will remain journalists.
Following the crisis, Qatar has been bypassing restrictions imposed by other Gulf countries by creating new partnerships. At the port of Doha, the government invited journalists to the opening of 2 new shipping services via Oman and said that other alliances will be made as well.
But who are your new friends?
My friend, we are not talking about the friend. We have a lot of friends. This is what we are working on, to make Hamad Port one of the biggest ports in the world.
Many prefer to remain silent about the ongoing situation. Yet in this prestigious university in Doha, the diplomatic crisis is the topic of the day.
Do you guys want to do more questions?
But I feel like there's hope, simply because we're neighbors. I'm not sure how things will look in the future, because once, you can't take something like this back. You can try to fix it, but you can never take it back.
This is not the first diplomatic rift between Qatar and the Gulf countries. But the unprecedented sanctions this time round may have serious regional and global consequences.
Well, to delve a little deeper into the issues raised in that focus report, we can speak now with Ruzbeh Parsi, a senior lecturer and expert in Iranian affairs at Lund University in Sweden. Thank you very much for being with us here on France 24. First of all, Qatar has long denied these claims that it props up terrorist groups. But is there any truth behind those accusations, do you think?
Well, there is, in the sense that both Qatar and Saudi Arabia have been dabbling in different kinds of groups, especially in the war in Iraq and Syria, which are very close to either Al-Qaeda or some other of those similar kind of Salafist jihadi groups. So there is a kernel of truth to it, but of course it becomes a bit, if you will, absurd when Saudi Arabia is launching the accusation, since they have similar track record.
Early this week, the UAE's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs said that this spat could drag on for many years. Is that true? And if so, what would the consequences of that be?
Well, the difference between this particular conflict and the previous ones is the fact that Saudi Arabia, especially under the new crown prince, seems to be adamant in basically driving home the point regardless of the cost. And we see this also in the war in Yemen, which has not yet been successfully concluded as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, but he simply will not give it up. And so there is an element of consistency, if you will, to the way that the new Saudi government is trying to pursue this, which could signal that this will actually drag on for quite some time. Now, of course, for Qatar's part, this is very problematic, but they're trying to stand their ground to some degree. And whether they will be able to weather this storm will also be dependent on whether Turkey and countries like Iran are willing to, if not extend a hand, then at least not shut them out.
Of course, we've already seen flights suspended, imports suspended. What else could the economic difficulties or the economic problems related to this crisis, what else could happen?
Well, there is, of course, speculation that what the Saudis are trying to do is to pressure a kind of internal coup, if you will, so that the Emir of Qatar will be replaced by someone who is more pliable. Now, of course, that would solve things for the Saudis very quickly. But we also have to remember that while Qatar is much smaller than Saudi Arabia, it does have vast resources at its disposal. It shares the largest gas field in the world with Iran. It has a very good relationship with Turkey. You also see other countries in the GCC like Kuwait not wanting this to escalate any further and trying to find a way to mend the fences. So while Saudi Arabia and the UAE are really trying to force their way through, they're doing it at a very high cost when it comes to what used to be some kind of neighborly relationship with the other Arab Gulf states.
You mentioned Iran there. Where has the Islamic Republic positioned itself in relation to this row? Saudi Arabia, of course, being that's leading this isolation, is, of course, one of Tehran's arch enemies.
Yes, well, the Saudi-Iranian rivalry, if you will, plays into these older, more internal Qatar-Saudi GCC conflicts. And this partly has to do with the positioning of Iran in Syria, but also has to do with the new leadership in Saudi Arabia and the way they view this conflict in quite sectarian terms. Iran has been somewhat conflicted, per usual. That is, you have officials who are being very cautious, trying not to take sides and trying to at least signal that they don't want this to escalate. And then you have others who are basically saying that Saudi Arabia is yet again shooting itself in the foot and we should take advantage of this. Now, there is a limit to how far this positioning can go, and that is the fact that Qatar and Iran, they have a reasonable relationship, a decent one, but they are not friends, and they are definitely not allies. And there is no alliance to be built between them, but at the moment, they are both subject to Saudi aggression, if you will.
And in your view, is this a crisis that's been brewing for several years? Has this just come out of nowhere recently?
No, this is an old crisis to some degree, but you can see how it's kind of shaping up into a perfect storm. The Saudi-Qatar rivalry is old. The Saudi fear of Iran is somewhat old. But what happens now, especially with President Trump visiting and the signals that at least on the Saudi side they seem to have gotten out of it, is, of course, that confronting Iran is something that the Trump administration either tolerates or actually encourages. And that means that the Saudis seem to think that they can up the stakes, if you will.
OK, Rouzbeh Parsi, a senior lecturer at Lund University there in Sweden. That's sadly all we have time for. Thank you very much for being with us here on France 24.
Thank you.